Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video 3 for the Thistle Pocket Tote. At the end of the last video we had just completed the exterior shell of our bag, and in this video we're going to be doing the lining assembly. The first thing we're going to start with is sewing our slip pocket to one of our main body lining pieces. So you're going to obviously need one of your main body lining pieces and the two remaining slip pocket lining pieces. So we're going to do something very similar to what we did for the exterior slip pocket, and we're going to place these two lining pieces right sides together, and then we're going to pin or clip them together. Now we're going to do exactly like we did for the exterior slip pockets, and we're going to leave one opening, but we're going to do that long basting stitch in the opening and press that seam allowance open. So if you can't remember exactly how we did that, you can watch me do it again, and also you can refer to the previous video where we did sew the exterior slip pocket pieces together. So again, I'm going to leave the opening here along the top edge. And if you remember, I just made some marks along the top where I want to stop and start my regular length stitching and do the basting stitch. And I left the opening. I did a mark 1.5 inch from each top corner, about like that. So back stitch, regular sewing all the way around, and then back stitch when you get to the other dot, and then a very long basting stitch between the two. Okay, so now that the two slip pocket pieces are sewn together, I'm going to trim my seam allowance everywhere except not at the opening here where I have my long basting stitch. Now, before I remove the basting stitches, I'm going to press the seam allowance open at the area of the basting stitches. Okay, so now it's pressed open. I'm going to use my seam ripper and just remove those basting stitches. And then we're going to turn the pocket right side out. And then I'm going to use my chopstick just to gently push out the top corners of the slip pocket. And then we're going to press that seam allowance all the way around. And don't forget, when we get to the top folded edges, we have an opening here that we need to shut. So you're just going to line those folded edges up and give that a good press as well. And now that the seam allowance is pressed all the way around, I'm going to top stitch the top edge of the pocket, and at the same time I'm sewing that opening shut. So now we want to sew the slip pocket to this main body lining piece. And you'll remember in the last video, we made some center marks here and here along the top and the bottom. And I want to make some center marks on my pocket as well, so that I know it's going to be nicely centered. So I'm just folding it in half and then marking the center along the top and the bottom. Then I am going to place it 2 inches below the top edge. And I'm just using my the measurements on my cutting mat to do that. And then making sure that all of these center lines are aligned. Now, you can't, well, I mean, you could technically use pins here to hold the pocket in place because the pinholes wouldn't show. But if you want to keep your lining piece unpunctured, then all I do is I just use Scotch tape. The glue just, it doesn't go on, it doesn't stay on your fabric or anything. So it's actually pretty good for this, holding things in place. I use it a lot, actually. You could also do the long way and put a little bit of glue and glue it in place, but that takes too long for me. So I just do this and I find it works pretty great. So it has to be this brand here because it just peels off so easily. Okay, so now I'm just going to go over to the machine and sew the slip pocket in place. I'm going to start at this corner, backstitch a few times, go all the way around, and then backstitch again when I get to the other top corner. So the pocket is sewn to the lining piece. I'm just using my iron to remove my center marks. I use a friction pen, which disappears with heat. Now, if you're worried about your pocket gaping open a little, you can go ahead and tack the sides in a tiny little bit. I wouldn't too much because it's not a super wide pocket. I'm just going to leave mine as it is. Now we're going to set this aside for now. The next thing you're going to need is your zipper overlay. And that's the piece we cut with this pattern piece. So it should be 11 inches wide by 2.5 inches high. And now you're going to need a ruler and a fabric pen. So once again, I'm just going to use my friction pen. Now on the wrong side of the zipper overlay, and remember the zipper overlay does need to be made out of a non-fraying material. So we're going to draw a rectangle box on the wrong side that is 9 inches wide by 1/2 inch high. Now if you're using the number 3 zipper instead of a number 5 zipper, you're going to want to make that box a little bit not as high. You're going to maybe want to do it 3/8 of an inch high. Now I know my ruler is 1 inch, exactly 1 inch high, so I just place it along the bottom here. And then I draw a line that is 9 inches. And then because I'm using a clear ruler, I know I just have to bring it up 1/2 inch. And then I draw that same 9 inch line again. And then I just draw just a small 1/2 inch lines that joins those two 9 inch lines. Try to do a good job drawing this box because when we cut it, we want it to be a nice perfect rectangle because that's going to be the opening of our zipper pocket. So you're going to want to use a very sharp pair of scissors. My scissors are getting a bit dull, so hopefully they do the job. But what I usually do is I use my rotary cutter just to start cutting that 9-inch line. And I don't start right at the corners because a rotary cutter is not precise enough to be cutting corners. So I cut a little bit of the first line, and then I'm going to cut a bit of the second line. Then I'm going to finish that off with my scissors. Okay, so that's what I have so far, and then I'm finishing the rest with my scissors. They have a really pointy ends, which allows me to go right in there and make some neat little corners. Or it would if my scissors were still sharp enough, but they're not very sharp anymore. Okay, there it is from the wrong side and the right side. So now we're going to sew this to the other main body lining piece. And I do want to center the overlay, so I know it is 11 inches wide, which means that the halfway point is going to be 5.5 inches. And I'm going to use my friction pen because it actually just rubs right off once it's done. Okay. And then you're going to need your double-sided tape. So very important with the double-sided tape, especially if you're using a very sticky tape, is to not put it anywhere where we're going to be sewing. So I am going to just put a strip along the top here and the bottom, and I'm not going anywhere near the edges. So we're going to be sewing all the way around the overlay with about, well, a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch, and then about 1/8 of an inch away from the inside box. So keeping that in mind, make sure that you don't put any tape where we're going to be sewing. And since you have an inch of space, that gives you a 1/4 inch top and bottom where there should be no tape. Okay, and then we are going to stick this to this last main body lining piece. And you're going to place the overlay about 1.5 inch from the top. And again, I'm going to use the lines on my cutting mat to place this, and also centering all of those center lines. So I'm just going to do one. I'm going to remove the backing from one piece of the tape first, and then I want those center marks to be aligned. Like this. And then the same thing for the second piece of tape, just making sure that my center lines, that looks good. Don't worry if it's a little bit off, like I'm not sticking my head here under the camera, so my overlay might not be exactly 1.5 inches away from the top, but as long as it's somewhat close, it will be fine. Okay, stick that down. I'm going to remove my center marks. Okay, so now you're going to want to, well, I mean, you can do a contrasting thread if you like, but I'm going to switch to a coordinating thread, and we're going to sew the overlay in place all the way around this box, and I'm going to use slightly less than 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, if you don't have a Teflon foot or an ultra glide foot or whatever it's called for your machine, basically it's like a plastic foot that allows you to slide, the foot slides easily over vinyl or other sticky materials like that. You should use a walking foot when you're sewing your overlay because you want some nice even stitching. The overlay is going to show in the finished bag. So if you don't want to backstitch on your overlay, you don't want any backstitching showing, you can actually leave some longer tails and then tie your threads, so pull the threads to the wrong side and then tie them together at the back instead of doing a backstitch. So I'm sewing really close to the edge here without sewing off the edge. Now when you get really close to the corner, if you have it already, put your needle in the down position and that'll help you make a nice sharp turn. So I'm going to just show you the way to tie it at the back. I'm leaving some long tails and then I'm going to pull these threads all towards the back and tie them together. This would be easier if I had something to pull them out with. Okay, so they're all pulled to the back and I'm going to tie them together. So I'm tying the threads where I started to the thread ends where I ended sewing. And then if you want, you can actually even just tape them down a little bit. And then that's what it looks like. You probably can't see on camera, but it looks perfect. So as I mentioned, you can tape down those threads, tape down the first bit, and then just trim off the last bits like that. Okay, so now we are going to have to cut an opening in here for our zipper. So I'm just going to start it from the right side just to make sure I'm cutting in the box. And we're going to flip it over and you're just going to cut away a bit. So I usually cut away until I get to my tape, the double-sided tape that I used. So about 1/4 inch. I don't want to cut too close to the stitches from sewing the overlay in place. And also make sure that you're not cutting the actual overlay in this step. You want to just be cutting the portion of your main lining that is about 1/4 inch past the opening in the overlay. Okay, all done. Now I know what you're thinking. This is ugly, but it really doesn't matter because you're not even going to see any of this when the zipper pocket has been sewn in. So that's what it looks like now from the right side. So we're going to just set that aside and we're going to attach the zipper pocket lining pieces to our interior zipper. Okay, so this is your last 11.5 inch zipper and your 2 zipper pocket lining pieces, which they should be 11 inches by 7 inches. Now what we're going to do first is we are going to trim away. You can trim away about 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch. It doesn't really matter because you're going to, well, you'll see it. You'll see in the next few steps, but it won't really matter. I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch, but I think I said 1 inch in the pattern. It doesn't matter. They're both going to work. And then we're going to need our iron. So what we're going to do is so if you have a directional print, you're doing this along the bottom edge of the direction. So whatever's the bottom edge of the pattern, that's where you want to be doing this. So you're going to fold up about 3/8 of an inch, even a 1/4 inch would do. You're going to fold that over towards the wrong side and then press it. And you're going to do it for the other piece as well. Now you're going to take the shorter piece. So if you see, you have, because we trimmed from one piece, we want that shorter piece first. Place it right side facing up, then place your zipper over top along the top unfolded edge. So here's my folded edge, and I want that along the top unfolded edge. I'm going to use some clips to hold it in place. Now I have my zipper opening towards the right because at the end I like my zipper to open from left to right. So wherever you place it now, it will be the opposite in the final zipper pocket. So if you like your zipper opening from right to left, then you can place it the opposite of what I'm doing. So my zipper opens, it's going to open in this direction. I don't want to open it because it's easier to sew without it being open, but it opens on this side. Okay, so now we're going to sew that zipper to the lining piece along the top edge here with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, the zipper is sewn to the first lining piece, and now we're going to press the lining piece away from the zipper. I'm going to close it this way. I like to leave my zipper tape shut. It just makes this whole process a little bit easier, I find. Okay, and now we're going to repeat what we've done with the second lining piece. So you're placing the zipper right side up along the top unfolded edge of the second lining piece, also right side up. And just using clips to hold it in place. And then we're going to sew the zipper to the lining piece, again with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. And then again, I am going to go ahead and press the second lining piece away from the zipper. And when you're done this part, this is what it should look like. So you have your lining pieces. They are wrong side facing up with your folded edge right side up like this. And then my zipper here is right side facing up. I have the smaller, shorter piece here and the longer piece at the top. So now I'm going to just place that on my work surface like this. And then we're going to take the main lining piece with our zipper overlay, and we're going to place it so that the zipper is centered within the opening in the overlay. And to make sure that it's centered, you want the edges of your overlay to be lined up with the edges of your zipper pocket lining pieces. And it doesn't have to be lined up perfectly. It really doesn't matter. Now again, I cannot use pins, which kind of makes this a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to use my tape again. And this time I'm taping. My seam allowance is kind of poking up here. Now, I would say glue this on, tape this on. Double side tape it on, but I don't want to do that because then it's going to prevent me. That didn't do anything, did it? Because it's going to actually prevent me from folding my pocket pieces down in the next step. So I'm just going to do this, and I'm really just going to pick this up like this and bring it over. So when I'm sewing this next part, so you're essentially going to be sewing the zipper with attached pocket lining pieces to this piece here by sewing all the way around the opening in the overlay here. And I try to sew 1/8 of an inch or a little bit less, but an eighth of an inch to be safe.
So I'm also, because I wasn't able to pin or clip, I'm going to be going really slowly, and I'm going to be adjusting the position of the zipper within the opening because I want to make sure that it stays centered and that there's an equal amount of space, like really an equal amount of zipper tape showing on either side of the coil. So as quickly as possible, I try to sew this part with my zipper shut. I find if you're sewing past a section of zipper where the zipper is open, it just makes it harder to keep everything centered nicely.
Okay, so now that the zipper is attached to the lining piece, we're going to flip this over and take this top folded edge and bring it down to meet the other folded edge. And I'm going to use a clip to hold that together. And then same thing with the other side. So if you trimmed off an inch instead of 3/4 inch, this is going to be a little bit different. There's going to be a little bit extra. It really doesn't matter. So what matters is that these bottom folded edges are aligned at the bottom. That is what is important. Now we're going to sew up the sides of our pockets and we're going to so when I'm sewing this part, I like to have my lining right side facing up on the bed of my machine. And then I just move this over and I start sewing here. I backstitch a few times and then I sew down to the corner and I kind of angle my seam out so that I'm left with 1/4 inch seam allowance by the time I get to the bottom corner. And then I do the same thing for this side. So I start at the top here, backstitch a couple of times, and then angle outwards a little bit until I have 1/4 inch seam allowance when I get to the bottom, and then backstitch again.
Now, if you get to the bottom here and your bottom folded edges aren't aligned anymore, that is okay. Just refold and adjust them a little bit. Okay, and that's what the first seam looks like. And I'm going to do the same for the second side.
Okay, so that's what that should look like now. You don't have to trim this seam allowance. It's not going to affect the final bag at all. And before we continue, let's open our zipper all the way. And that's what it looks like inside. Nice and tidy. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the main zipper panel closure for the bag. So you're going to need the, I think, 15-inch zipper tape, and you're going to need all of your zipper panel pieces, 2 exterior, 2 lining. First thing we're going to do is at the opening of our zipper, I'm going to use a white pencil that shows on camera. And I want you to make a mark on both sides of the zipper tape, so both sections on either side of the zipper coil. And you have to make the mark at exactly the same location. So I'm going to do it at about 1/2 inch from the edge. This doesn't have to be precisely 1/2 inch. What's important is that the marks are exactly at the same location. Then you're going to move your pull up and open up the zipper. So it's like this. So you should be able to see these 2 marks here and here. Now we want to have the zipper ends. They can't stay straight. We want to angle them so that the end of the coil is going to be trapped within the seam allowance of the zipper panels, because otherwise your pull will just zip right off. So we want to avoid that. You're going to pinch the zipper tape at the mark, just on one side. Let's ignore this one for now. So you're going to pinch it like this. And then you're going to bring that pinch up towards the coil. And at the same time, you're folding, the coil is going to be then angled outwards 90 degrees. And there's the fold on the wrong side. And then on the top though, you don't see a fold or anything. You just have the mark should be right meeting the coil here. And then I'm going to baste that in place. Now, if you're not good at machine basting this part, you can hand baste it with just a hand sewing needle.
So at the machine, I'm actually going to do on this side because I think it's going to be easier to show you this part on this side. So I let my pinch go here, but I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm pinching at that mark and then pushing this under, bringing the mark up so that it meets the coil, and then kind of adjust it. Sometimes if you have, I use my seam ripper just to hold it all in place, and then I don't sew my fingers up. And then back stitch. And that's what that looks like now. Hopefully you can see this.
Okay, so that's what it looks like when you're done, and you should have the folds here at exactly the same location on the zipper, like this. So now you're going to need your zipper panels. And I tell you in the pattern that you should fold 1/4 inch towards the wrong side at one end of each piece. Now, normally if we were using fabric for our zipper panels, I would tell you to press it, but we are not pressing vinyl and waterproof canvas. So all I'm going to do is fold in about 1/4 inch, and honestly, it doesn't matter if it's a 1/4 inch or a little bit less, a little bit more. Use your clips because we're actually going to just adjust them as we're sewing this part. But I'm still going to fold the one end and use a clip to hold it in place. And just try to make them approximately all the same, approximately a 1/4 inch. Now, you could glue them. I used to glue them, but then the issue with sewing zipper panels, and I think this is what frustrates everyone, is that no matter what, your fabric is going to shift and stretch a little bit while you're sewing. I mean, this is just part of it. It's just something you need to learn how to work with. So I leave it a little bit more flexible like this. Then you're going to take one of the lining pieces and flip it over so the folded end is here. So remember that my folded end is always where I have a clip. Then I'm going to take my zipper tape and I'm going to place it over top like this. Use more clips. And I want to leave about 3/8 of an inch of space here. So this is the non-folded edge of my zipper panel lining piece. Okay, so I want to leave about 3/8 of an inch, and then just going to use some clips to hold that in place. So my zipper panel is right side up, and the zipper is right side up as well. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the machine, and we're going to sew the zipper to the zipper panel. We're going to start at the folded end, and we're going to use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're just going to do a quick basting stitch, just to hold the zipper to the zipper panel. Okay, so that's what it looks like now. You're going to take one of your zipper panel exterior pieces, and you're going to line up the folded ends. And then what I do is I use another clip just to hold the fold. So it's important that the folded ends, that they meet at the end of the zipper like this. And then use clips to hold the rest. Now we're going to be moving our zipper pull out of the way as we're sewing this next step. So then you're going to use another clip and just hold the ends in place. So now we're going to sew these together. We're going to start at the folded edges and back stitch. We're going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew all along this length. Stop when we get 1/4 inch from the corner. So you should get past the coil. Make sure you leave your needle in the down position, and then sew all the way to the bottom again, and stop and back stitch again when you get to the edges here.
Now I'm finding this clip in the way, so I'm just going to keep it folded, and then see, now by not having glued it or anything, it allows us to make some slight adjustments. Okay, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch first. Okay, now I'm going to stop and move that pull out of the way. Now, here my vinyl has more stretch than the waterproof canvas, so it's really moved ahead here. That's fine. What we're going to do is we're still going to stop sewing after we get past the coil here, and stop and rotate right away. Okay, so now I know my needle is past the coil. Now is the time for me to stop and rotate, because I want to, if you see here, I want to be sewing 1/4 inch from the edge of the shorter piece, which is my lining piece right now. Make sure that you back stitch again. Okay, so if we look from the lining side, you'll see where we've sewn.
So we're going to trim this seam allowance and then trim at the corner here. Now, if you're worried about some stress being placed onto the zipper here, sew this little section here twice. Okay, so now I can't press these, so that is a little bit inconvenient. So what we're going to do is we're just going to flip these wrong sides together. I'm going to use my chopstick to try and push out the corner here as nicely as I can. And then I'm going to close the zipper. Now I'm going to refold these edges as well and have them line up. So when I start this part, I always start with the folded ends. and I'm making sure that they're both folded and lined up nicely. I also try to make sure that my lining pass, it doesn't go past the exterior fabric. I don't really want my lining fabric to show. And then going to, so I'm tugging everything away from the zipper, the two layers together, and just holding them together with clips. So if you're doing this with fabric, it's going to be so much easier. Really, all of the challenges with this part come if you're using material that is more difficult to work with. So cork, vinyl, things that you can't press really. If I was able to press these layers away from the zipper, way easier. But I think more and more everyone is using vinyl and waterproof canvas and similar things because they're just more practical. Okay, so now we're going to top stitch this entire seam allowance, and then of course we're stitching the folded edges together. And then I also like to do a quick basting stitch along this outer edge just to keep those layers together because again we're not able to press them, so basting them together kind of does the same thing.
Now, as I'm sewing along the zipper, I'm pulling on those layers. I'm pulling them away from the zipper. Okay, and as I mentioned, I want to just do a quick basting stitch along the outer edge.
Okay, so that's what it looks like now, and we're going to repeat exactly what we've just done, and we're going to attach the other two zipper panel pieces to the other side of the zipper. Now, when I'm doing this part to start, I want to make sure that the folded edges here line up with the folded edges here. That is probably the most important part in this next step. So, not happy with that alignment. A little bit better. And then again, I'm starting by basting the zipper to the zipper panel. Might actually do it from the wrong side. This is just a quick basting stitch. Right, and then again, lining this up. I'm not going to lie, I really don't like sewing zipper panels either, but it makes such a nice professional looking closure at the end that it's kind of worth it. Now again, when we're sewing at this end, we want to make sure that wherever we're sewing is going to line up with this edge. So I'm going to actually sew this first this time because I find this is kind of the most important part. So I'm going to close my zipper, and then I'm going to make a little mark. One of so right there, and then move my zipper pull out of the way. Okay, and then again, we're sewing with 1/4 inch seam allowance from these edges. Now right away, I want to make this extra strong, so I'm just going to backstitch and then keep going. Again, you'll see my vinyl is way stretchier. So I'm going to have to make adjustments again when I get to the end here. So just refold it, making sure that it aligns with the lining and that it also aligns here with these folded ends. And backstitch. Now once again, I am trimming seam allowance. I am not trimming my zipper though. And we're doing exactly the same thing that we did for these two zipper panels. Okay, and then we're going to once again top stitch on these three sides and do a long basting stitch on that side. Okay, so these are all done now. Pain to sew, but they do look so nice when you're done. Now, I know that we haven't finished the lining assembly from the pattern, but we are going to stop the video here because otherwise the last video will be extremely short. There's really not very much left to do. So we're going to stop here with the construction of our zipper panels. And then when we start the next video, we're going to do the final assembly of our lining shell and then the final assembly of our bag.